The morning started like any other Tuesday, but by noon, Robert's world had completely fallen apart. He sat in his car outside the bank staring at the papers in his hands. The words "Final Notice" were printed in bold red letters across the top. Foreclosure. The word felt heavy in his mouth, like a stone he couldn't swallow. 43 years old, and this was where life had brought him. 3 months ago, he had been a successful financial advisor with a corner office and clients who trusted him with their retirement dreams. Now he was unemployed, behind on every bill, and about to lose the house where his family had built all their memories. Robert folded the papers and shoved them into his jacket pocket. He couldn't face going home yet. Not with these documents burning a hole in his coat. Not when he would have to look his wife in the eyes and tell her they had 30 days to pack up their entire life. Instead, he drove to Riverside Park. It was the same park where he used to bring his daughter when she was little. She would run ahead of him on the walking path, her pigtails bouncing as she chased butterflies. Those were simpler times when his biggest worry was making sure she didn't scrape her knees on the playground equipment. The park was quiet on this Tuesday afternoon. A few joggers passed by, their breathing visible in the cool autumn air. An elderly man was feeding ducks by the pond. Robert found an empty bench near the playground and sat down heavily. The metal was cold against his back even through his coat. He pulled out his phone and looked at the missed calls. 7 from his wife. She would be wondering where he was, why he hadn't come home after his meeting at the bank. He should call her back, but what could he say? That he had failed? That despite all his years of helping other people manage their money, he couldn't save his own family? The weight of it all pressed down on his chest. When the company had let him go, they said it was nothing personal, just budget cuts. The economy was tough for everyone. But personal or not, the bills kept coming. The mortgage payment was due on the 1st of every month, whether he had a job or not. His wife had picked up extra shifts at the medical clinic where she worked as a nurse. She was pulling double duty, working days and some nights trying to keep them afloat. She never complained, never made him feel worse than he already did. But he could see the worry in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. He could hear her on the phone with her sister, whispering about their situation when she thought he was asleep. The worst part was their daughter. 9 years old and completely unaware that her world was about to change. She still asked for help with homework at the kitchen table where they might not be eating much longer. She still talked about Christmas and what she wanted Santa to bring. How do you tell a child that Santa might not be able to find them because they won't have an address? Robert watched a woman push her toddler on the swings. The little boy was laughing, his face bright with joy. Such simple happiness. When had life become so complicated? When had he stopped being able to provide that kind of security for his own child? His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his brother asking if they were still planning to host Thanksgiving this year, like they had every year for the past decade. Robert almost laughed, but it came out more like a sob. Thanksgiving. They would be lucky if they had a table to eat on by then, let alone a house to host in. He thought about the interview he had yesterday. The hiring manager seemed interested, asked good questions, even mentioned that they would be in touch soon. But soon wasn't soon enough. Soon might be next week, and they needed help now. Today, this very moment. The autumn wind picked up, sending yellow and brown leaves swirling around his feet. October was always his favorite month. The trees turning colors, the crisp air, the promise of holidays ahead. Now it just felt like everything was dying around him, including his hope. Robert had always been the problem solver in his family. When the washing machine broke, he fixed it. When his daughter's bike got a flat tire, he patched it up. When his wife's car made strange noises, he figured out what was wrong. But this problem was bigger than anything he had ever faced. This wasn't something he could fix with tools from the garage or a quick trip to the hardware store. He thought about calling his father, but pride held him back. His dad had worked 2 jobs his whole life to provide for their family. He had never missed a payment on anything. What would he think of his son who couldn't keep his family housed? What would he say about the financial advisor who couldn't advise his way out of his own financial disaster? The papers in his pocket felt like they weighed 100 pounds. 30 days. That's what the bank had given them. 30 days to come up with 3 months of back payments plus fees. Or they would lose everything. Where was he supposed to find that kind of money? He had already borrowed from his retirement account. They had sold his wife's jewelry. including her grandmother's ring that she had promised to pass down to their daughter someday. A young father walked by, carrying his sleeping toddler while his wife pushed an empty stroller. They were talking quietly about weekend plans, about which movie to see on their date night. Robert remembered when those were his biggest decisions, when the hardest choice was pizza or Chinese food for dinner. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine a way out of this mess. Maybe the interview would lead to something. Maybe they could sell the house quickly and avoid foreclosure. Maybe a miracle would happen. But sitting there on that cold bench, miracles felt as distant as the moon. The worst part wasn't losing the house. Houses were just buildings. The worst part was the feeling that he had let everyone down. His wife, who had married him believing he would always take care of her. His daughter, who looked at him like he could solve any problem in the world. His clients, who had trusted him with their money and their futures. Robert opened his eyes and looked around the park again. Everything seemed normal for everyone else. Kids playing, people walking their dogs, couples holding hands. Life was moving forward for everyone except him. He felt stuck in this moment, trapped between his old life and whatever came next. He pulled out his phone again and stared at his wife's number. She deserved to know what happened at the bank. She deserved time to prepare, to make plans, to figure out where they would go when the sheriff came to change the locks. But his finger hovered over the call button, unable to press it. Once he made that call, once he said the words out loud, it would all become real. There would be no taking it back. For now, he could sit on this bench and pretend that when he went home, everything would be the same as it was this morning. Before the meeting, before the papers, before his world came crashing down around him like the leaves falling from the trees above his head, Robert was still sitting on the bench when he heard the sound of children playing nearby. He looked up to see a small girl with dark hair tied in two neat braids, wearing a bright yellow jacket that seemed to glow against the gray October sky. She was on the swings, pumping her legs back and forth, going higher and higher with each push. Next to her sat an older woman on another bench, probably her grandmother, knitting something with blue yarn. The woman would look up every few seconds to check on the little girl, then go back to her needles clicking together in a steady rhythm. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She had the kind of energy that only children possess, the kind that makes them see adventure in everything around them. As she swung, she was talking to herself, or maybe to the teddy bear she had tucked under one arm. Even from a distance, Robert could see it was well loved, with fur that had been hugged flat in places and one ear that looked like it had been sewn back on. Robert found himself watching her, remembering when his own daughter was that age. Back then she had carried a stuffed rabbit everywhere. It was purple and had long floppy ears that she would twist when she was thinking or worried about something. She called it Bunny, which wasn't very creative, but it was hers and that's all that mattered. The little girl slowed down her swinging and jumped off while the swing was still moving. She landed with a small stumble but quickly caught her balance, laughing at herself. Children were so resilient, Robert thought. They fell down and got right back up, brushing off their knees and moving on to the next adventure. She walked over to the slide and climbed up the ladder, her teddy bear still tucked safely under her arm. At the top, she sat down and looked around the park like she was a queen surveying her kingdom. Her eyes scanned the playground, the pond with the ducks, the walking path where a few people were jogging. Then her gaze landed on Robert. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Robert tried to manage a small smile, the kind adults give to children when they make eye contact. But the little girl's expression changed from curiosity to something else. Concern, maybe. She tilted her head to one side, studying him like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. Robert realized he probably looked terrible. He hadn't shaved that morning, too nervous about the bank meeting to think about his appearance. His tie was crooked, his hair was messy from running his hands through it, and he was sure his eyes were red from holding back tears. The little girl came down the slide and walked toward him. Robert straightened up, wondering if he should get up and move. To another bench. Maybe his presence was making her uncomfortable. Maybe her grandmother had taught her not to talk to strangers, which was smart advice in today's world. But she kept walking toward him, her teddy bear bouncing against her side with each step. When she was about 10 feet away, she stopped and studied his face again. Robert could see her grandmother had noticed and was watching them carefully, ready to intervene if needed. "Mister," the little girl said in a voice that was surprisingly clear and confident. Are you okay? Robert was taken aback. When was the last time someone had asked him that question and really meant it? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen past the adult exterior to the person who was hurting inside? I'm fine, he said automatically, the response every adult gives when they're anything but fine. Thank you for asking, though. The little girl frowned and took a few steps closer. You don't look fine, she said matter-of-factly. You look like how I felt when my fish died last month. Really, really sad. Robert felt his throat tighten. Out of the mouths of babes, his mother used to say. Children had a way of seeing through all the walls adults built around themselves. They hadn't learned yet that sometimes you were supposed to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. Sometimes grown-ups get sad too, Robert said gently. He didn't want to burden this child with his problems, but he also didn't want to lie to her. It's nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. The little girl looked down at the teddy bear in her arms, then back up at Robert. She seemed to be having an internal debate about something. Her grandmother had put down her knitting and was watching more closely now, probably wondering if she needed to call her granddaughter back. When I'm really sad, the little girl said slowly, my grandma lets me hold Mr. Buttons. He makes everything feel better. Do you want to hold him for a little while? She held up the teddy bear, and Robert could see it even more clearly now. It was brown and tan, with button eyes that had been replaced at least once. One was slightly larger than the other, giving the bear a lopsided but friendly expression. There was a small hole in its side where the stuffing was trying to escape, and the fur around its neck was worn thin from years of hugging. This wasn't just any toy. This was clearly her most precious possession, her comfort object, the thing that helped her sleep at night and made scary things less frightening. And she was offering it to a complete stranger because she thought he needed it more than she did. Oh, sweetheart, Robert said, his voice catching slightly. That's very kind of you, but I couldn't take your bear. He belongs with you. You can just borrow him, she said, stepping even closer. I let my friend at school borrow him when her mom went to the hospital. He's really good at making people feel better. My grandma says he has magic in him from all the love. Robert looked over at the grandmother, who had stood up from her bench and was walking slowly toward them. She didn't look worried or angry, just curious about what her granddaughter was up to now. Is it okay with your grandma? Robert asked. The little girl turned to wave at the older woman. Grandma, this man is sad like I was about Goldie. Can he borrow Mr. Buttons for a little while? The grandmother reached them just as the little girl finished her question. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked at Robert with the same assessing gaze her granddaughter had used, but hers was tempered with the wisdom that comes with age. My granddaughter has a good heart, she said to Robert. Sometimes too good for her own safety, but good nonetheless. If she thinks you need Mr. Buttons, then perhaps you do. Robert felt overwhelmed by their kindness. Here were two strangers offering comfort to someone they didn't know, asking for nothing in return except the chance to help. When had he last encountered such pure generosity? I don't know what to say, Robert admitted. This is incredibly kind, but I'm a grown man. I can't take a little girl's teddy bear. Age doesn't matter when someone needs comfort, the grandmother said gently. And Clara has good instincts about people. If she wants to share Mr. Buttons with you, it's because she sees something that tells her you're a person worth helping. Clara. The little girl's name was Clara, and she was still holding out her teddy bear with both hands, waiting patiently for Robert to accept her gift. Robert reached out slowly and took the teddy bear from Clara's small hands. The moment his fingers touched the soft, worn fur, something unexpected happened. The weight of the foreclosure papers in his pocket seemed to lift just a little. Not gone, but somehow more manageable. Mr. Buttons was warm from being held close to Clara's body, and he smelled faintly of lavender, probably from whatever detergent her family used. The bear's mismatched button eyes looked up at Robert with what seemed like understanding, though he knew that was silly. It was just a stuffed animal. But in that moment it felt like so much more, see? Clara said, climbing up onto the bench beside him without invitation. He's already working. You look a little better already. Her grandmother sat down on Robert's other side, creating a small circle of unexpected companionship. Clara has been Mr. Button's caretaker since she was 2, the older woman explained. She's very particular about who gets to hold him. Robert cradled the bear carefully in his arms, surprised by how natural it felt. When was the last time he had held something just for comfort? When was the last time he had allowed himself to be vulnerable enough to accept help from anyone, let alone strangers? "What's your name, mister?" Clara asked, swinging her legs from the bench. Her yellow jacket made soft swishing sounds as she moved. "I'm Robert," he said. "And you're Clara, right? Your grandmother mentioned your name." "Yep, and this is my grandma Helen. We come to the park every Tuesday after my piano lesson. I'm learning to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but it's harder than it sounds." Robert found himself smiling for the first time all day. "I bet you're getting better at it, though." "I am. Grandma says practice makes progress, not perfect." "That's better than perfect because perfect is boring." Helen chuckled softly. "Clara has her own way of looking at the world. Sometimes I think she's wiser than all of us adults combined." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Robert held Mr. Buttons and watched the ducks swimming in the pond. Clara pointed out a squirrel that was burying acorns near a big oak tree, preparing for winter. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful. For these few minutes, Robert could almost forget about the papers in his pocket. "Mr. Buttons helped me when I was scared about starting first grade," Clara said suddenly. "I didn't want to go because I didn't know anybody and the building looked really big. But Grandma said Mr. Buttons could come with me in my backpack, and if I got scared I could just think about him being there." "Did it help?" Robert asked. "It did, and now I love school. My teacher is really nice, and I made friends with a girl named Zoe who has the same lunchbox as me. Sometimes being scared just means you're about to do something new and exciting." Robert looked down at the teddy bear in his arms. Could it really be that simple? Was fear just another way of looking at change? He had been so focused on everything he was losing that he hadn't considered what might come next. "What's making you sad, Robert?" Clara asked with the directness that only children possess. "Maybe talking about it will help. That's what my mom always says when I'm upset about something." Robert glanced at Helen, wondering if she would step in and tell Clara not to ask personal questions. But the older woman just nodded encouragingly, as if to say it was okay to share if he wanted to. "I'm having some trouble with grown-up things," Robert said carefully. "Money problems. My family might have to move, and I'm worried about how to take care of them." Clara nodded seriously, as if money problems were something she encountered regularly. "That sounds really hard. When my dad lost his job last year, he was sad like you are now. But then he found a new job that he likes even better. Maybe that will happen to you too." "Maybe it will," Robert said, though he wasn't sure he believed it yet. "Mr. Buttons thinks so," Clara said confidently. "He's very good at knowing things. One time he told me that my grandpa was going to get better when he was in the hospital. And he did." "How does Mr. Buttons tell you things?" Robert asked, genuinely curious about how this little girl's mind worked. "You have to hold him really tight and listen with your heart instead of your ears," Clara explained. "Try it." Robert felt a little foolish, but he hugged the teddy bear closer to his chest. He closed his eyes and tried to listen with his heart, whatever that meant. At first, all he could hear was the sound of traffic in the distance and Clara humming softly beside him. But then, gradually, he became aware of other things. The warmth of the sun on his face, even though the day was cool. The sound of children laughing on the playground. The gentle breathing of the grandmother and granddaughter sitting beside him. The feeling that for the first time in months he wasn't completely alone with his problems. "What do you hear?" Clara whispered. "I hear..." Robert paused, trying to put the feeling into words. "I hear that maybe things aren't as hopeless as I thought they were. See? I told you Mr. Buttons was magic." Clara clapped her hands together. "What else?" Robert held the bear tighter and tried to listen again. This time, what came to him wasn't a sound but a memory. His daughter, when she was about Clara's age, telling him that he was the best daddy in the whole world because he could fix anything. Not because he had money or a big house, but because he cared enough to try. "I hear that being a good father isn't about having all the answers," Robert said slowly. "It's about not giving up even when things get hard." "That's exactly right," Helen said softly. "Children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who love them enough to keep trying." They sat together for another 20 minutes talking about small things. Clara told Robert about her pet hamster and her best friend at school. Helen shared stories about raising her own children and how different the world was when she was young. Robert found himself talking about his daughter, about how proud he was of her kindness and her curiosity about everything. As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, Helen checked her watch. "We should probably head home soon, Clara. Your mother will be expecting us for dinner." Clara's face fell slightly. "But what about Mr. Buttons? Robert still needs him." Robert looked down at the teddy bear in his arms. Part of him wanted to keep holding on to this source of comfort, this tangible reminder that there were still good people in the world, but he knew the bear belonged with Clara. "Mr. Buttons has helped me so much already," Robert said, offering the bear back to her. "But I think he needs to go home with you. You're his real family." Clara took the bear but held it loosely as if she might give it back at any moment. "Are you sure you're going to be okay without him?" Robert thought about this question seriously. Was he going to be okay? He still had the same problems he'd had when he sat down on this bench. The foreclosure notice was still in his pocket. He still didn't have a job. His family was still facing an uncertain future, but something had changed. The crushing weight of despair had lifted just enough to let in a small ray of hope. He had been reminded that there were still kind people in the world, still reasons to believe that things could get better. "I think I'm going to be okay," Robert said, and for the first time in months he actually meant it. "And if I'm not, I'll remember what Mr. Buttons taught me today." "What did he teach you?" Clara asked. "That sometimes the help we need comes from the most unexpected places," Robert said, "and that it's okay to let people care about you, even if you don't know them very well." Robert walked to his car with a lighter step than he'd had in months. The foreclosure papers were still in his pocket, but they no longer felt like a death sentence. Something about Clara's simple kindness had reminded him that he wasn't facing this alone. There were still good people in the world, and maybe, just maybe, there were still solutions he hadn't considered. As he drove home, he thought about what Clara had said about her father losing his job and finding something better. Maybe this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just a difficult chapter that would lead to something he couldn't see yet. His house came into view, the same modest 2-story home where they'd lived for 8 years. The paint was starting to peel around the windows and the front steps needed repair, but it was home. His daughter had taken her first steps in the living room. They'd celebrated birthdays and holidays here. His wife had planted a small garden in the backyard where they grew tomatoes every summer. Robert sat in the driveway for a moment, gathering his courage. He had to tell them about the foreclosure notice. They deserved to know what they were facing so they could face it together. When he walked through the front door, he found his wife Linda in the kitchen, still wearing her scrubs from the clinic. She was stirring something on the stove that smelled like chicken soup. Their daughter Chloe was at the kitchen table working on homework with her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "Daddy!" Chloe jumped up and ran to hug him. "How did your meeting go today?" Robert felt his throat tighten. How do you tell a 9-year-old that everything she's known is about to change? But then he remembered what Helen had said about children needing parents who don't give up, and what Clara had taught him about listening with his heart. "Well, sweetheart, we need to have a family talk," Robert said, sitting down at the table. "Can you put your homework away for a few minutes?" Linda turned from the stove, and Robert could see the worry in her eyes. She knew that family talks usually meant something serious was happening. "What's going on?" she asked, coming to sit with them. Robert pulled the foreclosure papers from his pocket and set them on the table. "The bank meeting didn't go well. We have 30 days to come up with the back payments or we're going to lose the house." The silence that followed felt heavy. Chloe looked back and forth between her parents, trying to understand what this meant. Linda picked up the papers and read through them quickly, her face growing paler with each line. "How much do we need?" Linda asked quietly. "More than we have," Robert admitted. "A lot more." Chloe reached across the table and put her small hand over her father's. "It's okay, Daddy, we'll figure it out." "We always do." The simple faith in her voice nearly broke Robert's heart, but it also reminded him of Clara's confidence that things would work out, that sometimes scary things were just new adventures waiting to happen. "You're right, sweetheart," Robert said. "We will figure it out, but it might mean some big changes for our family." "Like what kind of changes?" Chloe asked. "Well, if we can't save the house, we'll have to move somewhere else," Linda explained gently. "Maybe a smaller place, at least for a while." Chloe was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she said something that surprised both her parents. "Remember when we went camping last summer and stayed in that tiny cabin? It was fun because we were all together. Maybe a smaller place would be cozy like that." Robert felt tears prick his eyes. His daughter was trying to make him feel better about potentially losing their home. She was being brave because she could see that he needed her to be brave. "That's a good way to think about it," he said. "But first, we're going to try everything we can to stay here." "What can we do to help?" Linda asked. "I can pick up more shifts at the clinic. Maybe take on some weekend work." "You're already working too much," Robert protested. "You barely sleep as it is." "We're a team," Linda said firmly. "We figure this out together." Robert told them about meeting Clara and her grandmother at the park, about how a little girl's kindness had reminded him not to give up hope. He didn't mention the teddy bear because it sounded too silly, but he talked about how sometimes help comes from unexpected places. "Maybe I should look for different kinds of jobs," Robert said. "I've been so focused on finding another position in finance that I haven't considered other options." "What else would you want to do?" Chloe asked. Robert thought about this. What did he want to do? For so long he'd been focused on what he thought he should do, what would pay the bills and provide security. But Clara had reminded him that sometimes new things could be exciting instead of scary. "I've always liked helping people," he said slowly. "That's why I became a financial advisor in the first place. Maybe there are other ways to help people that I haven't thought about." "You could be a teacher," Chloe suggested. "You're really good at explaining things. Remember when you helped me understand fractions? You made it so easy?" "Or you could work at a non-profit," Linda added. "You have so much experience with budgets and managing money. Organizations like that always need people who understand finances." Robert felt something stirring in his chest. Excitement, maybe. Or possibility. He had been so focused on replacing what he'd lost that he hadn't considered finding something different, something that might actually be better. "You know what?" he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to start making some calls. Not just to the same companies I've been contacting, but to new places. Different places." That evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, Robert and Linda sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a notepad. They made a list of all their expenses and all their options. It wasn't a pretty picture, but it was honest. And somehow facing the truth together felt better than facing it alone. "We might have to sell some things," Linda said, looking at their budget. "The dining room set we never use. Maybe your golf clubs." "I don't mind," Robert said. "They're just things. What matters is keeping our family together." Linda reached across the table and took his hand. "I've been so worried about you these past few months. You've been carrying all of this by yourself, trying to protect us from how bad things were. But we're stronger when we face things together." "I know," Robert said. "I was so ashamed that I couldn't fix this on my own. I felt like I was failing you and Chloe." "You could never fail us," Linda said firmly. "We don't love you because you provide for us. We love you because you're you. Because you care about us enough to sit on a park bench and worry about our future. Because you come home every day and help with homework and listen to Chloe's stories about school." That night, Robert slept better than he had in weeks, not because their problems were solved, but because he wasn't facing them alone anymore. Clara had been right. Sometimes the help you need comes from unexpected places, and sometimes the most unexpected place is right there in your own home, with the people who love you enough to face anything together. The next morning, Robert woke up early and started making phone calls. But this time, instead of just looking for any job that would pay the bills, he started looking for work that would let him help people, because a wise little girl had reminded him that being scared just meant you were about to do something new and exciting. 3 weeks after meeting Clara in the park, Robert got the call that changed everything. He was sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by job applications and his laptop, when his phone rang. The number wasn't one he recognized, but he answered anyway. "Robert, this is Michelle from Community Hope Center. We received your application for the financial counselor position. Could you come in for an interview tomorrow?" Robert's heart jumped. Community Hope Center was a non-profit that helped families facing financial crisis. It wasn't the kind of job he had ever considered before. But after talking with Linda and Chloe, it felt like exactly the right fit. Instead of managing investments for people who already had money, he would be helping families like his own navigate through their darkest moments. "Yes, absolutely," Robert said. "What time works best for you?" The interview went better than Robert had dared to hope. Michelle, the program director, was a warm woman in her 50s who had started the center after her own family had faced foreclosure years earlier. She understood what it felt like to lose everything and have to start over. "We don't pay as much as the big financial firms," she admitted, "but the work is meaningful. You'd be helping people who are where you are right now. giving them hope and practical solutions. "That's exactly what I want to do," Robert said, and he meant it. For the first time in months, he was excited about a job opportunity instead of just desperate for one. 2 days later, Michelle called to offer him the position. The salary was less than he had made before, but it was enough. Combined with Linda's income and some careful budgeting, they could make the back payments on their mortgage and keep their house. Robert called Linda at work to tell her the news, and she actually cried with relief. That evening, they celebrated with pizza and ice cream, and Chloe made a congratulations card with crayons and glitter. But Robert knew his story wasn't complete yet. There was something he needed to do, someone he needed to thank. The following Tuesday, Robert drove back to Riverside Park. He had a small gift bag with him and a hope that Clara and her grandmother would be there again. Sure enough, he spotted the yellow jacket on the swings and Helen on her usual bench, knitting something that looked like a scarf this time. Clara saw him first and waved enthusiastically. "Robert, you came back. Are you still sad?" "No," Robert said, walking over to them with a big smile. "I'm not sad anymore. In fact, I have some really good news to share with you." He sat down on the bench next to Helen and told them about getting the job, about how his family was going to be okay, about how everything had started to turn around. Clara listened with wide eyes, nodding seriously at all the important parts. "I told you Mr. Buttons was magic," she said when he finished. "He knew you were going to be okay." "He did," Robert agreed. "But the real magic was meeting you and your grandmother. You reminded me that there are still kind people in the world, and that sometimes the help we need comes from the most unexpected places." "What kind of work will you do?" Helen asked. "I'm going to help families who are having money troubles just like I was. I'll teach them how to make budgets and talk to banks and find resources to help them. It feels good to know that I can use what I've been through to help other people." Robert reached into his gift bag and pulled out a small stuffed animal. It was a golden retriever puppy, soft and new with a red ribbon around its neck. "This is for you, Clara," he said. "I know Mr. Buttons is special and I could never replace him. But I thought maybe he might like a friend. And maybe, if you ever meet someone else who's sad like I was, you could share this little guy with them." Clara took the puppy and hugged it to her chest. "He's beautiful." "What's his name?" "I think that's for you to decide," Robert said. Clara thought for a moment, then held the puppy up to examine his face. "I'll call him Hope, because that's what you found when you met Mr. Buttons." Robert felt his eyes fill with tears. This little girl continued to amaze him with her wisdom. "That's a perfect name," he said. Helen had been watching this exchange with a soft smile. "You know, Robert, Clara talks about you every day. She's been worried about whether you were feeling better. I think meeting you taught her something too." "What did it teach you, Clara?" Robert asked. "That grown-ups need hugs and kindness just like kids do," Clara said seriously, "and that sometimes being brave means helping someone else be brave too." They spent an hour together that afternoon. Clara showed Robert how much better she had gotten at the swings, and he helped her collect interesting leaves for a school project. Helen shared more stories about her family, and Robert told them about his new job and how excited he was to start helping people. As the sun began to set, Robert knew it was time to go. He had to pick up Chloe from soccer practice, and Linda would be making dinner soon. Normal, wonderful, everyday things that he had learned not to take for granted. "Will you come back and visit us again?" Clara asked as they prepared to leave. "I will," Robert promised. "But even when I'm not here, I'll remember what you taught me. And I'll make sure to tell other people about the importance of kindness, especially when someone looks like they need it most." 6 months later, Robert was settling into his new routine at Community Hope Center. He had helped dozens of families navigate financial crises, and every single one reminded him of his own journey from despair to hope. Some days were harder than others, but he went home each evening knowing that his work mattered. One afternoon, he was counseling a young mother who had just lost her job when she broke down crying. "I don't know how to tell my kids we might lose our apartment," she said. "I feel like such a failure." Robert reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small photo. It was a picture Clara had drawn for him, showing him holding Mr. Buttons with a big smile on his face. Underneath, in her careful first-grade handwriting, it said, "Sometimes angels look like little kids." "Let me tell you about a little girl I met," Robert said gently. "She taught me that asking for help isn't failing. It's being human, And sometimes the people who help us are the ones we least expect. As he told the story of Clara and Mr. Buttons, he watched hope return to the young mother's face. By the end of their session, she was sitting up straighter, ready to face her challenges with renewed strength. That evening, Robert drove past Riverside Park on his way home. He didn't stop, but he smiled and whispered a quiet thank you to a little girl who had changed his life with a simple act of kindness. Clara had taught him that sometimes angels do come in small packages and that the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact. He had learned that losing everything wasn't the end of the story. Sometimes it was just the beginning of something better, something he never would have found if he hadn't been brave enough to accept help from a 6-year-old girl with a teddy bear and a heart full of love.